Hey, Barbara, welcome to the Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
It's going to be great. And we always kick it off with a little bit of words of encouragement for caregivers, for family caregivers from the Happy Healthy Caregiver jar. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Oh, this one's very fitting, Barbara. It says, a person has two hands, one for helping herself or himself, I guess, and the other for helping others.
Oh my gosh, that's so perfect in that the caregiver tends to get lost in the shuffle and all the attention goes to the person they're caring for. And the caregiver is, can I get you some coffee? Can I, kind of in the background, and they're the ones doing all the work. That's an area that we, the outsiders, so to speak, can make sure that we take care of the caregiver when we come to visit. I think it's just a little small but important piece of this caregiving puzzle.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I have felt like in my own caregiving journey that there were many times I felt invisible, in certain situations. And just, yeah, how are you doing would been, really, how are you doing really would have been just a nice way to kind of to start that conversation. Well, you've been a caregiver yourself, Barbara, so I know you're an expert in everything to do with hospice, which we're going to get into, but you've cared for your mom, your mother-in-law, and hundreds of patients as a hospice nurse. So what came first, your profession or the family caregiving experience?
My profession. I started in the 70s being a hospice nurse, progressed and became director of a couple different hospices and home health care agency. In 1994, my stepfather and mother were both diagnosed with cancer of the lung, basically within months of each other. They died within 5 months of each other. And I
Wow.
took care of both of them, actually bringing my mother to live with me for 5 months, which was an amazing, life altering, really, experience. I've walked the caregiver walk. My mother-in-law lived with us for 5 years. I've had both sides of caregiving. I've been the professional and I've been the personal.
How are they different? Like what was that like when you had to kind of take your professional hat on and put your, daughter hat on?
Oh, well, I'll tell you a story. My mother is in the living room and the hospice nurse is there. And I'm saying to the hospice nurse, we're in the hall away from my mother. And I'm saying, how long do you think this is going to be? Where do you think she is? My husband is walking by and he hears me say this. And after Jean is gone, he said, Barbara, you taught Jean everything she knows. You're asking her what's going on. You know it, you teach it. And the thing is, when you're in those caregiver shoes, those personal shoes, you're Barbara the daughter. You are not Barbara the nurse, the administrator, or whatever you happen to be,
Yeah.
because it's an emotional versus a mental. I take care of patients from a mental standpoint, and I was taking care of my family from an emotional standpoint. Plus, family, you have all the baggage that you've collected over a lifetime to deal with.
Right. Right. You said that experience of caring for your mom when she moved in was life altering. Like what do you mean by that?
Well, one, we were having a challenging time. Our relationship has always been kind of challenging, and one particular day it was unusually hard, and I thought, I don't love her. Oh my God, I don't love my mother. Called my hospice social worker, Diane, please, can you come over? So we go in the bedroom, and I'm crying, and I'm telling her what an awful person I am. And she said, Barbara, you love your mom. Love is a verb. You are doing love in taking care of her. The noun is different than the verb. And just by taking care of her, you are loving her. That changed me so much.
You've got me, I'm a leaker, Barbara. My eyes leak a little bit. So, but I love that we do take care of people sometimes that are not nice to take care of. And that we do have, like you said, the history and the baggage of things. And so I appreciate, and I'm grateful that your hospice person, your chaplain, had the words of wisdom to share with you. And it's also another example of a resource that is available through hospice, of this chaplain and this person that you could call on for that advice. But we've mentioned hospice and all of that, but I think we should kind of pull back a little bit and let's hear it from you, the expert. Like, what is hospice?
Hospice helps people live the best they can within the confines that their body and disease has put them in. That, we associate hospice with dying. And so hospice gets their referrals when a person looks like they're dying. And when they look like they're dying, they have weeks to live. But once the physician says, I can't fix you, go home, put your affairs in order, that's the time to call hospice, because hospice can help you live. And yet we so associate it with death.
Yeah, I think that, my experience, the first time I brought it up with a physician and asked about hospice, I had like this shame experience with this person. Like, oh my gosh, like, my mom had COPD, she had, diabetes, a lot of chronic conditions, morbid obesity that were not curable. And we were trying to kind of just find that comfort spot, right? Like, looking back, I don't think it was a the wrong question to ask, but the way that sometimes it can get received, I think, is tough. Like, when is the right time to bring up that conversation about, with your physician? Or do we even need to ask the physician? Can we just call up a hospice agency?
Well, let's start with the first time you need to consider hospice is when you make your advance directives when you're 20 years old. We all need to have advanced directives and put down what we want when we come to the end of our life. That's number one. Number two is, I'm going out on a limb here, if you can get the physician to say, I can't fix you, that's the hard part, because the medical model treats diseases that people have. And the idea is to treat that disease until the person's dead. That's the medical model. The hospice model and end-of-life doula model is we take care of people that have diseases. And when you take care of people, you look at all the components and what is their quality of life? How are they living until they're not? And so I want hospice referrals when the physician says, I'm having trouble fixing you, and that's a hard one, When you look at someone and you say to yourself, and we've all done this, mom's not going to be here next year at this time. We give people more time than they have. And when that thought occurs to you, then that's the time to check out hospice. Call them on the phone. Get them first, go to your physician and say, I'm thinking about hospice. What do you have to say? And then if you don't feel comfortable with what they've said, then call hospice on the phone and say, my physician isn't really being straight with me. I need some guidance. Would you come talk to us? And they'll come and take your history and they'll decide if hospice is appropriate. And because they have regulations, they have admission criteria, so they can determine if it's an appropriate referral.
And I'm grateful that you share the verbiage that, that they can use. And, there's no shame in intellectual self-care, right? Like, we're just asking the questions to get smarter so that we can make informed decisions. I also never thought about thinking about hospice as a young person, but it is definitely part of what we want to be true at end of life, and thinking about putting ourselves in that situation so that someone can follow our instructions on that. I've had different experiences with hospice. I've had hospice in home with my mom. In fact, she was on hospice for 2 years because, frankly, the last 6 years of her life, Barbara, I would have said the answer to that question was like the last hug I gave her was going to be the last hug, but she was an energizer bunny type of person, and she took the scenic route, I like to say, to heaven. But with dad, we were in a hospice community in Florida where for a month he was do you say on hospice or in hospice? That's always the preposition that I'm starting to say it, and I'm like, I always think, is it on hospice or in hospice?
I think you can go either way. It just
Okay.
depends. Yeah.
Well, so he was in a hospice community for the last month of his life. And then I've had a hospice experience with my aunt who received hospice in a nursing home. And then we've had home hospice with my mother-in-law. So I've had positive experiences and different experiences with hospice. But I can tell you the first time with my dad in particular, it was, oh my gosh, where has this been, and why haven't we thought about this and used this? And I want people to hopefully hear this podcast and be informed.
Hospice has a bad PR image. It says we take care of people who are dying instead of saying we help people live. And I've taken people off hospice because they have lived. But the care and the support that you get on hospice is invaluable. Taking care of someone at end of life is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better. But most people don't know that. And so they judge how the person how they get better, and think that's the kind of care they should be receiving. And just because you can't heal the physical body doesn't mean there isn't healing to be done. The emotional, the mental, the spiritual parts of a person. And that's what hospice deals with: symptom management, keeping people comfortable, and then healing the other parts of a person.
Yeah, it's a privilege, frankly, to be with people through this experience of hospice, and if end of life is in the future, to be with that as well. I have found too, in sharing with family caregivers who are maybe reluctant about hospice, a couple things. One is, my understanding is that Medicare pays for hospice. And whereas Medicare does not pay for long-term care. Now, I'm not really saying that we should use hospice as long-term care, but let's consider it when it makes sense to consider it, because it does, it is a valuable part, I believe, to the care team, in that it does offer relief to family caregivers. For example, when my sister was primary caregiver for my mom the last 2 years of her life, she no longer had to take my mom, who needed a bariatric wheelchair and was hard to move around, to take her to doctor's appointments. They came to her in the home setting. She no longer had to go buy the stuff that she needed for her personal care and her medicines. Like, it was delivered, and covered, frankly, not out of pocket expense. We had the chaplain that was available for my mom and my sister. They bathed my mom. My mom required 2 hospice nurses because of her size. For my sister to be able to do that on her own was like, it was a feat. It was a feat to be able to do that. Whereas the 2 hospice nurses came in and bathed and took care of my mom, 3 times a week, and changed the sheets. Huge relief for my sister, and friendship. They became friends, frankly, with my sister. But what are some of the other things that I think I might be missing as far as the benefits that hospice, if it makes sense in your situation, can offer a family caregiver?
I think that education is a big component. We don't have any role models on what it's like to die. All we have is television and the movies, and people don't die like they do on television or in the movies. And yet that's what we expect. So when mom doesn't be the Judi Dench saying a couple of magic words and closing her eyes, when mom is breathing loud and restless and agitated and making funny faces, we think something pathological is happening. If you have hospice to guide you and say, mom is doing a great job, this is how the body dies, and it's letting go, and that education of what mom is doing in relationship to dying brings neutralizes the fear that all of us are bringing to this experience as we are involved in taking care of someone. And it brings the guidance and reassurance of how we can take care of our loved one. So that not having role models on what death looks like is really a disservice to us caregivers. We need that guidance, or we're going to think something pathological is happening.
I think to compare to what we see that is happening. And, when you're talking about it's not like TV and movies, like I immediately think about my own experiences of being at the bedside. And, some of them are funny, almost, frankly, like where, my dad was getting ready, taking his last breath, and then he'd, take another one, and it wasn't the last breath. And my mom was dozing off next to him, and, wake up, mom, this is it. This is it. Like, you can't make some of this stuff up sometimes. But being there and having that shared experience, of course, is important. So everybody's different. I think to live it and to go through with it. But like you said, to just we don't have good examples of that. We need to kind of normalize those conversations around death. And I know we'll link to another episode I did with somebody about a death positive movement and some death cafes and things like that, so they can learn more about that. Why did you get into this? We kind of skipped over that part, but it is a very interesting career path to choose.
It is. Well, I graduated from nursing school 1962, long time ago, and said to myself, I've made a huge mistake. I should have never been a nurse. I should have been a social worker, but I never nursed. I never worked in the medical profession after I graduated. In the 70s, Elizabeth, and I raised a family. That's what I did.
Right.
In the 70s, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came forward and said, Americans are not taking good care of their dying. And Dame Cicely Saunders in England developed a concept that she called hospice for taking care of people at end of life. And I heard about those two things and attended a workshop that was called hospice-like concepts. And I mean, I was hooked. I absolutely thought, this is what I thought nursing was about, the personal aspect of it. And so I spent a week with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I studied everything that I could, and then I became a hospice nurse. And this is before there was Medicare, hospice. We made it up as we went along because there were no guidelines. And when I look back now, I believe that those 5 years that I had of direct patient care before I got into administration, those 5 years were my schooling. It was the patients and families that taught me how people die, because our medical profession, they didn't know. Up to that point, the person who was dying in the hospital was at the end of the hall, and they didn't even go down there. And so my patients and their families being at the bedside, our goal was to be at the bedside at the moment of death. And so that's how I learned how people die. And that's my hospice, that's my hospice career.
Yes, you're a pioneer, and we're lucky to hear right from you. What, another question that I think a lot of times caregivers have too, Barbara, is how is hospice different than palliative care, or is it different than palliative care?
It is. Number one, palliative care is not covered by Medicare, so all those financial perks aren't there. Palliative care, the positive side of palliative care is the doctors, you have a life-threatening illness. The doctors are trying to fix you. You can be on palliative care and have support and guidance and still receive treatment. With hospice, you get support and guidance and financial aid, but you can't be receiving treatment.
Got it. Yeah, you got to be on one side or the other. But to your point earlier, sometimes people do come off of hospice. Like, I even know, like in my mother-in-law's situation, she was on hospice, then broke her hip, and we wanted to, have her hip fixed medically. So we did do that, and then she came back on. So it's you live and you learn. Yes, it's flexible. Are there any other myths about hospice that we haven't covered?
Well, a big topic, and maybe we have to come back and talk about this, but is pain management and the use of narcotics. In our environment today, all of us are really aware of and frightened of the use of narcotics. And what people don't understand in end-of-life care, disease causes pain. Dying is not painful. So if a person has pain in their disease history, then hospice is going to treat that pain till the person's last breath, because we want them comfortable. But if pain was not part of the disease process, then just because they're dying doesn't mean that you're going to treat with a narcotic. Sometimes just a couple of ibuprofen will take the edge of some ache all over which is occurring. So that's a big topic.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that I think I have heard in the thing. Well, tell us, Barbara, about the resources that you have available for people who want to learn more about end of life, hospice, having the conversations. You got some good stuff out there.
Oh, thank you. I have a website, bkbooks.com, where I have all of my literature. I think all of my materials, and I cover the whole spectrum of end of life care, is that they're all short. My booklets are 12, 13 pages, large print, fifth grade level, short, simple, but direct and gentle. So I've got a signs of approaching death. Then I have a companion booklet that says, here's what you do while the signs of approaching death are occurring. So those two booklets go together. There's a grief booklet that people use as a sympathy card. A book on pain management at end of life, a book on dementia. And that's something we haven't even talked about in relationship to end of life. But dementia doesn't play by the rules. So there's a booklet on how do you know when end of life is coming for someone who has dementia. So I have DVDs. Go to the website, look around, see what you think.
Yeah, so good. And then you've got some great stuff on social media too. So we'll link to all your books, your website, and your social things and the show notes page for this episode. I got to ask you, Barbara, as we're also talk about self-care on this show, is you deal with some really heavy topics. This is your career, this is your life's work. How do you give so much to other people? How do you remain energized? How do you stay energized?
Well, I learned when I was doing direct patient care, and which I recommend for everyone, is that we need closure. When our patient or our family or our neighbor, whoever dies, we need closure. As a healthcare professional, I developed a ritual that allowed me to let go, to have that closure. I went to visitations. I think visitations where you see the body has actually more value than a funeral. But that's just me. So when we're dealing with end of life, to have the opportunity to say goodbye is really important. And if you can't be there at the bedside when your loved one is dying, then write your special person a letter and put everything down that you would have said to them if you were there. Write about the positive, write about the negative, because there's no perfect relationship. So put it all on paper, burn it, and throw the ashes to the wind. Let how well you live your life going forward be the tribute of your love for the person that died.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Those are great. Those are great tips. When you're not speaking about hospice and educating other people, Barbara, like what do you like to do for fun?
I read, love a good mystery. We've been watching Slow Horses on TV. So family is very, very important to me. And so bringing my family together, weekends, having the kids here and the grandkids and playing games, that's what stabilizes me. That's what allows me and gives me the energy to move forward and reach out to others.
That's
I also
good.
like
Yeah.
movies.
Yes, yes. Well, I'll have to check out the slow horses. I'm not familiar with that, but we do like some shows to just kind of unwind. So I have a book, Barbara, called the Just for You Daily Self-Care Journal, and it's got 365 prompts. And the purpose of it is to hopefully allow folks to put some intention behind their own health and happiness. You know, a lot of times as caregivers, we lose ourselves sometimes on in caring for other people. And so this shines a spotlight back onto us and our dreams and um our things and our habits and our rituals and what we want to be true in our life. So I picked out a couple for you. Let's see what we got here. How do you manage stress?
I hate to say this, but I often eat. It's chocolate's my
That's
go-to.
real.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
I
it.
yeah, chocolate, love it. Um, and okay, we talk a lot about the five senses, and that helps us kind of stay present sometimes in a moment. Do you have any favorite scents that you like?
Wow. Um, I suppose my eyes, because it allows me to um, not only observe, but to assess, to take in that which is out and around and about me.
Nice. What did your teenage self think that you'd be doing right now?
Oh, my teenage self thought that I would be a nurse because my mother wanted me to be a nurse. And my teenage self would also have seen me as a writer, which I think is interesting because my love of writing started when I was in like sixth grade. So I've kind of followed a path unconsciously. I wasn't really aware of the steps that have led me to where I am. But as you point out, looking back, we can find the path that we were
Yeah,
on.
we have that in common. My mom was a writer and a nurse, by the way. My daughter's a nurse. It skipped a generation. But I used to tell my mom I was going to read every book and write. And so it is interesting how we get that. Last question for you is, what's one thing you keep telling yourself you're going to do when you have more time or you retire?
Well, at my age, most people would have retired by now. I won't. I mean, it's kind of like this is what I'm on the planet for, is to guide and teach. And I will be doing what I'm doing now until I take my last breath. And I've done what I've wanted to do. My husband and I have traveled the world, literally, and so we've done what we wanted to do, and now I'm teaching and reaching out, and that's what I want to do.
If this isn't in my journal, but I do kind of have one question. It's like, if you could wave your magic wand and want something to kind of, for you to see something kind of play out in this space, a hospice, end of life, like what would that be?
Ooh, that's another 30 minutes. Um, uh, I I would like hospice to become less of a business and more patient oriented. I would like to get in there with hospices and do some adjusting uh, if
Well,
I
you're
could.
available to do that, right? If they're listening and they're like, we need some adjustment in our hospice, I'm sure you've got some great consulting advice to give. Barbara, there's family caregivers are listening. We spotlight family caregivers who are also experts to kind of share their caregiving and self-care tips. But what would you say to a caregiver that's listening? Um, just some gentle words for them.
I think you have to put your oxygen mask on first. And most caregivers are fix-it personalities, they're givers, and they tend to put themselves last. They help everyone else, and then if there's anything left over, then that's what they get. And in order to stay a healthy caregiver, we have to put self-care at the top of our list, because then we will have the energy and the drive to take care of someone else, and to do it positively rather than having it feel like a task that I have to do. And if you take care of yourself first, then you can be of service from a loving spot within you.
Well said. I love all that. Yes, yes, yes. I'm like cheering you on. So thank you, Barbara. You're a pioneer. You walk the talk. And I love all the resources that you put out. Thank you for educating me and for educating the Happy Healthy Caregiver community. And I love that you're unstoppable. Keep going.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. I've had a great time. I hope you have too.
Me too. Yes. Thank you.